Hello and welcome. This video assumes you have already seen part 1. Unless otherwise indicated, interpretations and viewpoints expressed in this video are mine. So, was your curiosity raised, and if so, what did you feel would be the focal point in this part 2 video? Interestingly, no one obviously felt quite bold enough to write down what they thought might be the point in question. To refresh the cells, let's just run through it again. You may have noticed the L plate in the middle of the rear window. That generates 3 areas of interest. The first is about the general public standard of driving, secondly the legal aspect, and thirdly the DVSA's viewpoint. The problem with moving above the standard driving test level is that the further you go, the more you realise how poor the general standard of road driving really is. As mentioned in the part 2 introductory video to the channel, also via the 100 scale in that video, the standard driving test is the lowest level of competence for driving on UK roads, and most drivers, if spot tested today, would almost certainly fail that basic test of competence and safety for being on the roads. To be most efficient in road driving, you want all the information you can get, and view is obviously a major element in this. Apart from view to the front, view to the rear can at times be almost as important. You want as clear and unobstructed view as you can get.
Ran hard on my tail coming off the roundabout. Most signals. Okay, watch this one on the near side. Signal is on. Thank you very much. Make the transition. Okay, so there is a close follower. He's
An item placed in the middle of the rear window, i.e. directly in the sightline, clearly indicates that the driver does not place much, if any, value on rear view, and in the advanced sector such evidence suggests a driver with low awareness and one to be wary of. Even more interesting is that here you have a supervising driver who accepts, or who actually placed, the obstruction to view in the worst place possible, and that is also subliminally giving a message to the learner driver that rear view is not important, and this at the formative stage of their driving life. Having been training officer for 4 advanced driving groups, 2 each of IAM and ROSPA, it was always accepted in my training programs for efficient supervising to use a secondary central mirror when working with associate members, i.e. those studying to take either their Institute of Advanced Motorists or ROSPA Advanced Drivers, as it was then, test. I can't remember the last time I saw a secondary mirror being used by a driver supervising a learner in a private vehicle, even though it is a requirement for the test to have one fitted. Using one, if nothing else, would also send a message to the learner that rear view really is important. That's the first point. The second is the legal aspect, of which it can be said there are 2 key elements. One is the statutory notice, which defines whether a feature is or is not legal, and the other is the enforcement side, which is dealt with under Part 2 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. Here I'm not concerned with the enforcement side, purely with the legal aspect. However, it is worth mentioning if a vehicle is illegal, the police do have the right to remove it from the road, although it seems this action is normally applied with discretion according to the perceived level of safety or lack of it involved. The starting point for defining legality is the Road Vehicles Construction and Use Regulations 1986, which I shall refer to as CUR, of which the relevant part is in Regulation 30 which states: all glass or other transparent material fitted to a motor vehicle shall be maintained in such a condition that it does not obscure the vision of the driver while the vehicle is being driven on a road. This is a catch-all. It does not specifically say which windows. The key word is all. Writing to the Department for Transport, I inquired if it agreed if any aspect of a vehicle stood within CUR it is legal, and if it stood outside it then the status is illegal. The DFT replied it agreed that the situation is binary. The interesting thing about Regulation 30 is that it is only concerned with keeping any glass clear of obstruction and clean, which means items on the glass. So, internal or external obstructions to view do not count, with one exception pertinent to the MOT, which, in my view, should be a precedent all round. Back to the plot. Regulation 30 might have stimulated Annex 6 in the Highway Code, part of which states: windscreens and windows must be kept clean and free from obstructions to vision. For those who don't know, contravening a must in the Highway Code is an offence for which you can be prosecuted or receive a ticket. The interesting point here is that the obstructions to vision seem pertinent to seeing through the windows, but not specifically about items on the windows. So, for example, if you have what I call funny bunny stuff deliberately placed in the sightline on the rear window shelf, that should count, as indeed should spoilers outside obstructing the view. Even the key ADI support organisation, the Driving Instructors Association, falls foul of these CUR regs in their advertising. Next, it is interesting to look at the DVSA's official guide to driving, in which, of the 485 pages, some 8 are a chapter purely concerned with mirrors. The introduction to the chapter says that using mirrors has to be part of safe driving practice. It also states that good drivers always know as much about the conditions behind as they do about the situation ahead. I have paraphrased slightly, but it is all there, at least in words, which are the easy bit. Action and example are, of course, where it really matters. Finally, the third element, the DVSA's viewpoint. The long story short is that via email correspondence the organisation showed a distinct lack of interest in the subject. One would assume that a government organisation would be fully conversant with any legal aspects pertinent to its work, but it seems to me that the DVSA may well feel the construction and use regs are outside its remit of interest when they should obviously be well within it. Now we get to what is effectively the whodunit reveal. The location is the only gradient close to the local driving test centre, and ADI vehicles can regularly be seen there for learners to practice hill stops and starts. Likewise, it is also used for the same purpose on official DVSA driving tests. An ADI is a government-approved driving instructor for teaching learners. So, a reasonable assumption is that this is either a supervising driver with a learner, or more likely either an ADI with a pupil or possibly a candidate on a DVSA driving test. To cover all bases, let's consider that it might be none of these at that moment, but whichever way it runs, clearly a supervising driver either placed or accepted an L plate right in the middle of the sight line with all the inferences that encompasses for standards of driving. Magnifying a still image from the rear camera shows what appears to be two bright yellow spots where the shoulders of the passenger are. This suggests that a high-vis jacket is being worn. Talking with local ADIs, they said they don't know of any ADIs who wear high-vis, bar one of a company which obviously wants to appear more professional than everyone else. However, DVSA examiners apparently do wear them as a matter of course. According to one local ADI, the timing is exactly right for a driving test of a hill stop and start in that location, and having seen the enlarged picture from the rear camera, is convinced an examiner is in the passenger seat. If it was a candidate on test, the DVSA guidelines for using one's own car do make the point in more than one place that because an examiner would not have all-round view, certain vehicles and a rear window tint which is insufficient for an examiner to see through would make such a vehicle unsuitable for the test. If the vehicle was on a test, then those criteria alone should, in my view, have made it unsuitable. If an ADI, then it was again a really bad example for a learner, particularly by an accredited professional driving instructor. In summary, in the first instance there is a reflection of a low general public driving standard which, in my book, also puts a question mark on the competence of the average driver to supervise learners. Secondly, the vehicle is illegal. And thirdly, that the vehicle might have been on an official DVSA driving test. If that was the case, then the examiner condoned the obstruction to view to the rear, also being contrary to good safe driving principles and very much the wrong example for learners and or test candidates, even without taking the construction use regulations into account. Finally, having good review and making consistent use of it as an integral part of good driving strategy is pretty basic stuff, and none more so than with learners and at the very formative stage of their driving life. This should also be promoted as such, both in words and most importantly by example, particularly by formal organisations as well as professional persons in the driving industry. Thanks for watching.